Hello, and welcome to AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I'm your host, John S. In today's episode, we feature a conversation with John L., author of A Freethinker and Alcoholics Anonymous, and my friend Kevin P., founder of Freethinkers in AA Kansas City. I think you'll enjoy this interesting conversation.
Hey, we're talking to John L. here this evening, and my name is Kevin P. And here in Kansas City, coming from Kansas City, Missouri. John is the author of a number of books, but his, I think, most recent one is A Freethinker in AA Alcoholics Anonymous. Freethinker in Alcoholics Anonymous, published by Pagan Press in 2014. Now, John, is this how many books do you have out there?
About a dozen. I'm not even sure anymore. It depends what you count.
Okay, yeah. Understood. Yeah, but I have to tell you up front, in my 25 years in AA, this has been the most important book I have read ever on modern AA. If I'd found your manuscript, you'd left it somewhere in a bus stop or a Starbucks or something, I would have borrowed it and signed my name to it and published it under my name and steal it from you, because I agree with you virtually on every point, almost. But I'm just wondering, you sobered up in '68, correct?
Yeah, right. February '68.
Man, that's a long haul. So, and you were in that was in the village in New York there, in the Perry Street Workshop.
Yeah, I lived in what's called either the Lower East Side or the East Village, which would be east of Greenwich Village. But Perry Street Workshop would be about 2/3 of a mile walk across town.
Okay. Well, besides Smoky, what were AA meetings like back then?
Well, I describe them in my chapter in the Perry Street Workshop, but even there, then as now, there's an enormous difference in one group to another and one individual to another. So, I compare AA in Boston with the AA in Perry Street 50 years ago, 48 years ago, and it's not really a good comparison. For example, in Manhattan, after I got my first year, I did a lot of talking. It was believed that you had to have a year of sobriety before you really did much speaking. Mm-hmm. But I spoke at Sober Sam's in the Bowery, which was a Salvation Army shelter for homeless men, alcoholics. And I spoke at a group in the Upper East Side, which it was rumored that almost everybody there was in the social register. It was very high class, and I felt perfectly at home in both groups. Mm-hmm. And then there was everything in between. Perry Street was very heterogeneous. All types of people really low bottoms. I was a very low bottom drunk physically, but there were also people who were established writers and professors and everything in between.
Now, I read, in your book about you consider yourself a low-bottom drunk, and then you go into a description of your physical demeanor after drinking the amount of alcohol that you drank. That particularly struck me because I'm a low-bottom drunk also, and had to be almost dead before I would come into the program. So, there's still low-bottom drunks around. Back then, did people care if someone was cross-addicted, or had Bill Wilson written his pamphlet yet about how narcotics people should not come to our meetings? Or
well, things change. When I came in, I was a pure alcoholic. I never tried any of the drugs, heroin, cocaine, and all of that. I smoked pot a few times, and I thought it was for children. Didn't do much. But that's changed now. I personally think that at least some meetings, to me the ideal meeting is a closed meeting for alcoholics only. And that's because we can then talk candidly to each other, as opposed to open meetings which are open to the general public. And I think that anything alcoholics talk about to each other can be relevant, even though it, may not directly concern alcohol.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, I'll back up a little bit. You used your last name in publishing the book, so you made a conscious decision to break your anonymity. Was that, from the Marty Mann years, or what's your thinking on that?
It was a number of things. I discussed it with people. What's her name? Oh dear, who wrote that biography? Oh, Susan Cheever. Wrote a thing in the piece on anonymity, and she broke her anonymity. But there would be all sorts of practical problems for me if I were to use, only my initial. Problems with distributors, with Amazon, with librarians, and I just decided, to me, the anonymity rule would apply to people that were self-promoters. Like the story of Bill W., and the baseball player, where Bill W. was envious of the fact that the baseball player got so much publicity, and he tried to compete with it, and then was brought back down to earth, with other people, and invoking the anonymity thing. But I'm not a self-promoter. It's just the fact that I'm the author. And
so it was a practical reason.
Yeah, basically.
Also, I kind of think that whole anonymity tradition is all about not promoting AA. It's not necessarily about us being secret. Although I know it's that level of press, radio, and film. But I'm kind of getting a little bit liberal on that whole thing, to be honest with you. I don't know how you feel about that, John, but I'm kind of.
Well, I think it's a lot of things, but it's that also, yeah.
Yeah.
It's, certainly different professions and people have different reasons, so I always want to respect anyone else's anonymity, but I'm very liberal on that aspect. You begin the book with some very inflammatory words about, in the foreword talks about, be forewarned, I'll criticize AA in this book when I think it's warranted, and I'll defend AA when it's necessary, from the AA haters, and also deal with the AA fundamentalists, that the freethinkers, atheists, agnostics, we kind of get gored from both sides. And I was wondering why did you take on, why did you publish this book in 2014? Why did you feel there was a need for it?
Well, I don't know if my words were incendiary. To me, they were just simply a matter-of-fact statement of what the book was. But the main reason was that I had written quite a few articles for the website AA Agnostica, which are about half of the chapters in the book, and I realized I had, the kernel of a book there, and I decided to round it out with, a few more. The two most important chapters are on the 24-hour plan and the fellowship, which I added for the book. But question of getting it from both sides is true. I try to make a distinction, which may be difficult, between what I call the true AA, and that's really the AA that I knew in my early years in New York City,
yes,
and the false AA, which would mean all of the religiosity and the cultic behavior and irrationalism and all that stuff.
And, that was my favorite part of the book, in the 5th chapter there, where you quote, rather that you write that, the true AA is the AA that works. This is the AA of the 24-hour plan, staying away from the first drink at a time, from the first drink a day at a time, and that the true AA is centered on the fellowship, alcoholic sharing experience, strength, and hope to help each other get sober, stay sober, and rebuild others' shattered lives. Then you go ahead to say, the false AA is one of dogmatism, cultic behavior, conformity, intolerance, anti-intellectualism, and helpless without God religiosity. The false AA not only repels non-believers, but reasonable believers as well. By driving away alcoholics who are desperately in need of help, false AA kills. And you know, that pretty much summed up everything that I felt about AA today, because my experience has been that AA is a lot more religious than it was 25, 20 years ago. Have you found, in your experience, you found the meetings getting more religious, and there's more God talk and group talk in the meetings nowadays?
Well, it's hard to make a comparison. I mean, the meetings that I've gone to, I lived in New York City for 30 years, and then Provincetown on Cape Cod for 8, and now I've been in Boston for 13. And none of the meetings I regularly went to ended in the Lord's Prayer. Mm-hmm. None of them I regularly go to. Well, no, that's not true. No, none of them I regularly go to now read How It Works, which I loathe.
Hate too.
But the Lord's Prayer is still recited in other parts of the North America, so...
Oh, absolutely, yes.
I have no idea.
Here.
There's one group right in Harvard Square, which meets at noon, and they not only read How It Works, but they read passages from 12 and 12, and they read passages from the Bible, and they end with the Lord's Prayer. Well, ick.
Yeah.
But only a few blocks from there are evening meetings, which are not at all religious. One of them is what I would call Boston's only crypto-secular meeting. And it's called As We Understood. And it's a fine meeting. No prayers at all, no readings. But these, intergroup central services wouldn't allow them to be listed if they used words like agnostic. So they had to use a word like As We Understood, which is completely meaningless. But word's gotten around. Unofficially, it's known as the God is Dead group.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, I know I was talking to this guy that got sober like in 1965 in California, and he said that back when he was first getting sober, that people didn't really make a big deal about the steps so much, that for them the biggest thing was just the 12th step. For example, they would all go down to central office and answer the phones and do that kind of service work for people. Is that kind of how it was in New York too back in the 60s?
Well, yeah, certainly Perry Street. Perry Street had a fine beginners meeting. People from all over Manhattan would go there for beginners meetings, and it was believed very strongly that you should not introduce the steps at all in the first year of sobriety.
Interesting.
Yeah. And there was a meeting a few blocks away from Perry Street, which was a step meeting. And everybody from all over would show up whenever they had a fourth step, because people would go there to dump all of their deep character defects, and it got really... I was absolutely shocked, when I heard the things that people were confessing to, that they would discuss it in public. But it was a lot of fun. I mean, it was a competition, and everybody enjoyed it. It wasn't at all, saturated with religiosity the way you think of it.
That's funny. So it was an open fourth step meeting.
Yeah, but the 12, I don't know. It's really hard for me to make a comparison.
Yeah. Okay. I was just kind of curious. Because, of course, the AA that I went to was here in Kansas City anyway. The group I went to was big book all the time, 12 and 12 all the time. And, trying to do it just the way it was back in the 1930s. And so I'm learning that it wasn't always that way.
Well, the question is, when did AA start? And AA history is really quite dishonest. I mean, you never know, the moment Bill and Bob talk together for the first time, and they have this allegedly original idea that the way to stay sober is for one alcoholic to talk to another. Well, that wasn't original at all by a good century.
No.
The Washingtonians certainly had that. Then sometimes it looks as though the meetings in the Oxford group, the Alcoholic Squad in Akron, that was organized by Henrietta Seiberling. They confuse that with AA. But to me, the only real way of looking on the founding of AA was in May 1939 when Clarence Snyder had the first meeting that was called Alcoholics Anonymous in Cleveland, Ohio, not Akron. And, before that, AA, there was no A really. I mean, AA developed with its character of meetings having a certain format, different types of meetings, speaker, beginners, discussion, rotation of leadership, all sorts of things. These were unknown before the first meeting of AA in Cleveland. So I don't think AA have ever had an official founding moment. If there was, I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
It just sort of grew. I mean,
you speak to that in your book about, Clarence Snyder and the problems in Ohio and the split between he and Bill and Bob, as I understood it. But, today I'm in meetings where people say that, the steps are divinely inspired and that Dr. Bob and Bill, they pretty much describe them as prophets. And, I can't tell you how nervous that makes me when I hear that in a meeting, that they think that we're special people and they have an incredible list of rules and regulations that you're supposed to follow. And I just didn't know whether you've seen that there's more of that or there's less of that nowadays.
Well, a couple of things. The more I learn about Bill and Bob, the less I like them. So I am biased. But I think there's a great danger of a leadership cult, which is, I'm opposed to cultism in any form, and certainly that's a part of it.
And John, you're not like a big proponent of the steps per se either. It's more the connection with other alcoholics and the 24-hour plan.
Well, if anyone wants to make steps, I mean, I have my own version, which is in the book, A Freethinker Steps. But I think the main thing goes back to something highlighted by Dr. James R. Millam in the book Under the Influence. And that is to say that it's wrong to say that alcoholism is caused by character defects. That it's the other way around, that good people, through their alcoholism, can do bad things, and that, with healing, in time and abstinence, the good personality will return. I mean, it may need a little help, but, it's not true that alcoholism is merely a symptom of psychological defects. In fact, alcoholism is basically a physical addiction to a particular drug.
And see, that's what I've argued in meetings is that, when I stopped drinking, there's a lot of sociopathic things that, I don't do anymore because I had a very good group that I first went to. And they were very liberal. And, they kept telling me to, don't drink, and your job today is just to make it till bedtime, not drink. And then, can you come back tomorrow? And I'd say, well, yeah, I'm employed. So they would be back. As simple as that is, I found it extraordinary in my recovery to use the, as you say in your book, the 24-hour plan and the fellowship. And I would assume that you feel that that's the meat of the program.
Yes, exactly. And the fellowship covers so much. I mean, the fellowship is not only alcoholics talking to each other and sharing experience, strength, and hope. It's also, as someone pointed out in the discussion thing, it's doing a 12-step call to somebody who is in really bad shape and, dealing with their messes and all the rest of it.
In all your years of recovery, what has been the most difficult for you? John?
I'm sorry, what?
In all your years of recovery, staying continuously sober since you walked in the door, what's been the most difficult for you? Was it the physical recuperation at the very beginning, or what?
It's hard to say. I mean, in terms of a danger of picking up a drink, I never, ever had a doubt, that I had to remain abstinent. I mean, for me, 48 years ago and right now, if I were to pick up a first drink, I would consider myself signing my death warrant.
Yes.
And it might happen in 2 days, it might happen in 6 months. I have no way of knowing, but, it would happen. But probably for this fellowship, there were a few times when simply I can't say the right word, disagreement isn't quite it, and hostility, to and from others, was a danger to my fellowship. In my book, I describe how in very early sobriety, I was upset by the attack on the campaign headquarters of Senator McGovern, and I shared that, and I had been active as much as I was able in the anti-war movement, and people violently attacked me. I mean, they were furious in yelling and screaming. And, women had to lead me outside of the meeting, and we held an alternative meeting.
Really?
On near Perry Street. Yeah. And, of course, they were also, anti-war activists. And so there were about maybe, I would say, 8 or 10 of us that left the meeting, and we had a fine meeting, and I was crying. I was very new in sobriety, and I was very upset about the attack on the campaign workers. It was the police of Mayor Daley in Chicago burst into the campaign headquarters of a Democratic candidate, and they destroyed equipment. They beat up people. They even took campaign workers and dragged them out of bed in order to beat them up. It was a horrible, horrible form of fascism. Fascism is almost an inadequate word, and I was very upset. But I just realized there are some things you don't talk about in meetings. I mean, it's one thing to say that you can talk about, anything if you're in a meeting with other alcoholics, but politics is something that's best avoided completely.
Yeah, and that was a pretty divisive time for politics. 68, 69, 70?
It would have been about 69, I think. I forget the exact date, but
I think it was 69.
It's in my book, but yeah, it's
Now, I have to give you credit, John. I've been quoting you in traditional AA meetings, and they had the same reaction. They want to, scream, holler me down, and shout me out. And I think a number of people that are very fundamentalists are very upset with the secular movement, and also very upset with people like me who, I consider I have long-term sobriety. And I quote things out of your book in meetings, and people get really upset with me, and I'm suddenly a pariah among a number of groups here in town, which is one of the reasons why we started a Freethinkers group in Kansas City, was to have somewhere to go and be safe.
Well,
and we can say what we want to.
Yeah, you're lucky to have a Freethinkers group. I'm working now on an article which turned out to be much, much more difficult than I thought, but it's on how we share with each other. And one of the little subtopics is so-called crosstalk, which has been defined differently. Like when I came in, if crosstalk was used at all, it meant simply one person speaks at a time. I mean, you don't interrupt someone if you're not, while they're speaking, and you don't speak out of turn.
That's how I always understood it, too, until recently.
But now there's a very peculiar interpretation, meaning that you should never, even if it's your turn and you're called on, you never should respond to something anyone else has said, which is absolutely ridiculous. There's no way you could share experience, strength, and hope if you never respond to each other.
Well, that brings us to rigidity in the meetings and the rituals that we're seeing. As you mentioned earlier in the interview, the people that, we have to read the 12 traditions, we have to read the 12 steps, we have to read how it works, and some groups then read the promises, and it just goes on and on.
Yeah.
And they're so rigid about crosstalk and how they interpret it, or, can you bring a pet to the meeting or not, or something totally ridiculous. And the trusted servants, I'm not sure a lot of them should be trusted that much.
On that crosstalk thing, though, what I hear people talking about now, where it has affected me, where I've actually been hurt by it, is people use crosstalk, at least around here, John, to put you in your place. So if you're not saying what the group thinks is the right thing to say, as far as believing what the big book says, and that's the kind of group I came from, is you have to say what the big book says, and if you deter from that, people will put you in your place by addressing what you said and contradicting what you said.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not easy. I don't know, rigidity, I've only been to, a few meetings in Boston, so I have no idea what, there are hundreds of meetings in the greater Boston area, and I have no idea what a lot of them are like. But to me, the meetings in Boston are a sort of a smug complacency rather than rigidity. And I really do feel I had much better AA in Provincetown and Manhattan. But still, I like the groups I go to. There are about maybe 4 of them. And I don't go to meetings that often. I don't feel the need to, so I just sort of rotate the groups I go to.
Interesting. All right. Do you, I've always had a theory that the longer you're sober, the less you say. And the less AA, you put your life back together through the framework of AA, and when you get a life, you don't have the time to go to 2 meetings a day. Have you noticed that there's a lot of people that have 20 years that don't come to AA anymore?
Well, there are different patterns. I've had a rather full life, so times I've been very, very busy, but I've always tried to go to at least 1 meeting a week. But my friend Richard, who died a few years ago, he was 80 and he had almost 40 years of sobriety. Richard only went to 5 or 6 meetings in the course of a whole year. And for him, that was enough, and he checked in. But my friend Ben in San Francisco died recently at the age of 89, and he had 59 years of sobriety. And for years, decades maybe, he simply went to 1 meeting every week, the same meeting, and it was, they were all friends, and it was probably as much social as anything, but that was what he did.
Interesting, yes. Moving in a different direction, have you been keeping up with the dust-up in Toronto about the agnostic group being delisted because they had their own version of the steps, and now the suing to force the central office to list them?
Well, it's outrageous, but I don't know what to do not being there. But I think there's a time for a certain amount of militancy.
Really?
Yeah.
On our part, John?
Yes.
That, as you said in your book, these people that are practicing false AA need to be confronted because the stakes are so high.
Well, if they're, the delegates or whatever they were to the meeting of a central service where they decided to delist them, I think there'd be nothing wrong with several meetings from the agnostic group going to their meeting and a discussion, just calmly and candidly explaining why they were opposed to whatever, the readings, and why they were opposed to being delisted. I don't think, it shouldn't be done in an angry way, but when you get to things like the steps, it's going to be a long struggle, and I have no idea what will happen. Maybe AA will split. Maybe AA will be reformed as it ought to be. I have no idea. But there is an industry, built around the publication of all of these books and stuff. And I don't think there's any way that Alcoholics Anonymous would go along with shelving the 12 and 12 or, the big book or As Bill Sees It or any of this other stuff.
You know what gets me about that, John? I guess they still sell a lot of those books, but it seems like if they wrote a new book, a new modern book from our century, that would sell. And especially if it had the AA name on it. It seems like they could actually do well with that. I don't know why they don't think that way.
Well, the book that I recommend is Living Sober.
Yeah.
And I had been sober a few years when it came out, and we were all so excited because it represented what AA was to us. This is in the Perry Street and Greenwich Village groups. But there's certain hostility to it. It was revised a few years ago, and the revisions on the whole were for the worse. Like in Living Sober, there's one chapter, like chapter 32 or something, which is on the steps. It's very brief, and the steps themselves are never printed at all. So it's like the steps are among the least important thing for the author of it. But the revision, they put the steps back in. They're printed there. And they made various other changes. But the author of Living Sober was simply given a lump sum for writing it, which probably wasn't that much. He got no royalties at all, whereas Bill W. made millions. Back when a billion, that was when to say someone was a billionaire, you meant like a very rich man. Now a billionaire, wouldn't amount to much.
So he really did well, didn't he, Bill W., with the book?
Well, he was only one of about 32 authors, but he managed, connived, to get himself listed as the only copyright author. Mm-hmm. And so no one else got a penny of royalties, but he got millions, as well as the other books.
I was going to ask you too, John. I know you're not crazy about Bill W., and a lot of people love him, and I always thought he was universally loved too, but he wasn't. What is it about Bill W. that you don't like and that maybe other people in AA resented?
Well, I dislike a lot of things, including his prose style. I'm a writer.
Yeah.
But I was called a snob because I said that, the big book was poorly written.
Yeah.
But he did one thing to me that was so sleazy, where his partner, Hank P., in a thing called Works or whatever it was on a slip. He was drunk and helpless. He needed money desperately just for another drink. And Bill W., instead of persuading him not to drink or trying to sober him up, took advantage of it. He conned Hank P. into giving up all of his shares in return for $200, which wasn't even given to him. The $200 was to buy furniture which belonged to Hank and may very well have been worth more than $200. That's something that you simply don't do. You don't take advantage of someone being drunk.
Yeah. I've heard that story.
Well, it's true. Mm-hmm. I think the story in the book by a man named Raphael, I can't remember the exact title, Matthew Raphael, tells it. The stock that Hank gave up would have been worth millions in a few years.
Wow. And
he got $200, not even that, but just for, furniture.
Yeah, I've certainly heard that story also.
But the people who knew him in Perry Street, he was still alive when I came in. I don't think anyone liked him, but mostly he was just spoken of condescendingly. Mm-hmm. One person hated his guts, but that was, I can't remember what it was over. But I truly believe that Bill... Are you still there?
Yeah, we're here.
Oh, okay, something went wrong. I was playing with my mouse. I truly believe that Bill W. was relapsing in the last few years of his life. And it's a matter of connecting the dots. But on the last couple of months of his life, he repeatedly demanded that his male nurses get whiskey for them. And he got mad and attempted to slug a male nurse, for not getting it for him, which is very stupid because male nurses know how to take care of themselves. Mm-hmm. But he also didn't go to AA meetings in the last several years of his life. And he gave the excuse that, oh, if I went, I would be asked to speak, which is not necessarily true. I mean, he could have found a group where nobody knew him. And he tried, all sorts of drugs other than alcohol. He was always looking for some chemical cure that would let him start drinking again. So, to me, if he demanded whiskey, it meant because he had been drinking and simply wasn't able to get it himself, so he wanted the nurses to get it for him. That's only a hypothesis, but to me it makes sense.
Yeah.
Now,
I don't see anywhere in Bill W.'s writings where he ever mentioned a 24-hour plan or simply don't drink. It's all just on character defects or obtaining spirituality or other stuff like that.
That's true, isn't it?
Yes, hocus pocus, as I call it.
Yeah.
In a little different direction, John. Now, you mentioned that you don't believe in any kind of psychotropic drugs. What is your reasoning behind that about antidepressants and all that that have been prescribed to members of AA? What's your thinking with not having any drugs to assist in sobriety?
Oh, I didn't quite catch your question.
Is your stance on not having any kind of psychotropic drugs? If a psychiatrist prescribes you an antidepressant, that you feel, from the reading, it seems you feel rather strongly about that we shouldn't be doing any kind of drugs at all, whether they're prescribed by a doctor or not.
Okay, that gets into a rather horny area. When I came in, the meetings, not only Perry Street, but in the village, had a thing announced at the beginning of the meeting. They said, we ask that if you have used any mood changer or had a drink today, that you do not take part in the discussion, but please stay around and talk to someone afterwards. That was just standard. There was only beginning the reaction against Librium and Valium, but the medical establishment said that Librium and Valium are safe. They're not like those other terrible tranquilizers like Milltown. They don't have all those toxicities, and they're absolutely not habit-forming. Well, we heard one person after another at Perry Street describe the horrors of addiction to Valium or Librium and how hard it was to break the addiction to them. So we knew it wasn't true, and so word of mouth in AA was far ahead of the medical establishment. And, of course, now it's admitted that they certainly are addictive and they're not good. But the doctor I saw, Frank Seixas, was the top alcoholism specialist in the United States, and I got to know him quite well. And he, clearly was in the thing that, was not the thing to do for alcoholics to take other drugs. Some of them, like barbiturates, we considered to be simply alcohol in dry form because it was so close to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I heard a presentation by a male nurse at a roundup in New York City where he discussed in great detail all of the sedative hypnotic drugs, which include all the tranquilizers. And the conclusion from it is that, using any of them is simply not a good idea for an alcoholic. But in addition to that, I've read quite a bit on the antidepressants, the SSRI drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And many books by Peter Breggin, Breggin, who's been sort of the main person sounding the warning on them. And here we have drugs where there's no valid research showing they have any benefits whatsoever.
I've read the same thing.
And that's better than some drugs. Some drugs
I know.
some miraculous benefits, but they were all based on fraudulent research.
Yeah.
But anyway, these drugs cause permanent, irreversible nerve damage. Thing like what's called tardive kinesia, where even years after stopping the drug, all of a sudden the body will just go a spasm, a twitch, and it lasts forever. they're highly addictive. Actually, I have a book right here by Peter Bregan. It's called "Your Drug May Be Your Problem: How and Why to Stop Taking Psychiatric Medications." And it varies from individual to individual and drug to drug.
Right.
But in a susceptible person who's taken one of these for at least a few months, the withdrawal can be so severe that people commit suicide. They just can't bear it. So it would be wrong to tell someone who'd been on them to just stop cold turkey.
Right.
They have to know what they're doing. And some of them, it may take several months, making just tiny, tiny decreases in the dosage until the person is finally off of them. But, that to be taking a drug that's that addictive is not a good idea.
That's really interesting. I think you're 10 times, 100 times more intelligent than I am, John. But I take an antidepressant. I take bupropion, which I don't think it's addictive or anything. But if I were not to take it, I would feel that slide into depression that could be dangerous. So it kind of makes you kind of wonder. But I've also read in the paper, New York Times, some time ago, that they did have a study that these things really they aren't proven to be effective. And that I might just be experiencing, what's it called, the placebo effect, possibly. But if I am experiencing that, then why not? I don't know. What do you I think it's interesting to think about.
It's a very difficult thing because for the AA member to give advice on this opens the door to all sorts of things that are not good. Yes. But on the other hand, the idea of trust the doctor, no AA should ever play doctor. When I came in at Perry Street, there were only like 3 doctors in all of New York that thought could be trusted with alcoholics. And the doctor I finally saw, his main mission as he became a medical director of the National Council on Alcoholism was to educate his fellow physicians who learned nothing in medical school about alcoholism, nothing that was true. And if you leave it up to doctors, they will base it not on what they know, but what has been told them by what are called detail men. And detail men is a euphemism for salesmen of the pharmaceutical companies. Doctors will subscribe to the New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, they'll have all of this. But they don't read them. They get their information from the detail man. And if you were to, people think if you research something that you get a second opinion. So you ask another doctor, what do you think? And they probably have the same detail man. They'll say the same thing. It's awfully difficult. Well, what I try to say is that people should do their own research. They should do a Google search. They should read books. And the trouble with this is that most Americans don't read at all.
That's true.
And not even magazines or newspapers. And among the minority of Americans that occasionally read books, most of them read junk. So a book like Peter Bregan's books, which are really not that difficult, they're not technical especially, but they would be well beyond the average person.
Speaking of reading, John, this is kind of just an off-side comment, but back in the day, I used to actually read a real newspaper, and I noticed that when I read a real newspaper, that I would read pretty much all the articles. I'd start from the front page, and I might move around a little bit. But now I don't read a real newspaper. I go to the New York Times website, and I just click on whatever might look interesting. So I don't think I'm getting the in-depth type of information that I used to get when I actually read a paper. I don't know. Do you think there's anything to that maybe?
Well, I do the same thing that you do, but I read a book a number of years which changed my perceptions. The book is called Toxic Sludge is Good for You, and it's an expose of the public relations industry. The author is John Stauber, Stauber, and it shows that about 50% of what appear to be news stories in a newspaper are phony. They're simply planted there by public relation firms. And especially if you get something that deals with a commodity like alcohol.
Yeah.
So time and time again, there will be a thing on how people have two or three drinks a day live longer, how it's good for your heart to have a couple of glasses of wine a day. This is phony. There is no research there, and the reference is never given. And the Danes did a study which addressed this hypothesis, and they found there's absolutely no benefit to any amount of alcohol at all. That, maybe a couple of drinks a day would not be too harmful, but, every bit of it is at least a little bit harmful. And for alcoholics, of course, the first drink, is fatal.
And as you pointed out, you don't have to drink alcohol. We were talking about when we published that naltrexone article on AA Beyond Belief, and that was a comment that you made, is that, hey, listen, you don't have to drink alcohol. You can actually be abstinent. You don't have to drink
exactly.
it. Yeah, there's actually no reason for it if you just use the 24-hour plan.
And there was a time when I may have derived pleasure, a little bit, even after I had crossed the invisible line, which would, there were good periods and bad periods. But on the other hand, I don't think I would enjoy a glass of wine or two, or even if I could do it. I mean, the taste is, even the finest wine, the taste is not all that great. And if I did drink any alcohol at all, I would probably want to go on to,
Yeah, I can't toy with it. The first time I heard about the Sinclair method was a few years ago, and it really captured me. I actually started thinking about drinking a lot to where it was actually becoming an obsession again. And that's the most dangerous thing in the world for me. If once that thought it becomes an obsession, I either have to drink or I have to talk to another alcoholic. I got to do something. But fortunately, I did talk to other alcoholics. I'm honest about what I'm saying. So I don't know. It is kind of dangerous. I mean, you have to be careful about this kind of stuff.
Absolutely, and I would be more than skeptical of any so-called research that showed that it had any benefits at all. But I had lunch with someone a few days ago, and it was like really a 12-step thing. It was only the two of us, and it just happened. But he, clearly is an alcoholic. He's been hospitalized quite a few times in the last couple of years, and he was, conned into this naltrexone thing. And the last time I had seen him 2 months ago, he was not in good shape, but he thought he was. But anyway, when I saw him a few days ago, he had lost a lot of weight. I mean, it was not a healthy sort of loss of weight. And he admitted, that he took naltrexone now and then, but it really was not doing what it should. And so I had the whole thing of trying to sell, AA to him to get him to go to a first meeting. And it was hard because he also was, was MIT graduate and not into religiosity. And I don't know if I succeeded or not. I mean, I gave him the meetings and I did my best to indicate that there were benefits in not trying to do it alone. I mean, sobriety by yourself.
One last question that I had is your opinion. Do you think that AA's numbers are dropping substantially?
I don't know, and I'm not sure. I mean, I made my living in survey research, but I can't think of how to design a study that would really get at that. Some meetings I've gone to do seem to be smaller than they were 10 years ago, and I don't know what that is. It could be that younger generations, there are fewer alcoholics or pure alcoholics. Well, actually, there are fewer pure alcoholics anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I don't know. To me, it's not the right way to gauge AA is to say that, an increase in membership is good and a decline is bad. Does AA do what it should for alcoholics who come to it? in that sense, I think it's, a mixed bag.
Interesting.
That's a good point. Yeah, I know Kevin and I have talked that it seems like the meetings around here are not as big or as many as there used to be. But, and I've read the membership surveys that the AA publishes, but I've never actually seen. Have you ever seen a survey? Have you ever been asked to sign up on a survey? I don't know how they do things.
I don't know how they would do it.
Oh, yeah. Well, one point I should make is that even though I've criticized regular meetings a lot, there is something that almost is spiritual in attending a meeting, even if it's one that has religiosity. And it's simply the idea of, in early sobriety, it's a matter of whether I would live or not, and that was true for several months. But simply being at a meeting with other people, who looked, healthy and, recovering, gave me inspiration. If they can do it, so can I.
Absolutely.
And I think that goes beyond any, ideas or what people say or what they don't say. So I'm grateful for all of AA meetings, really, in a way, even including those that have things I don't agree with.
I agree with you on that. That's kind of a nice way to kind of end the interview, I think. That good positive note there.
Thank you very much for your time, John, and I just want to give a personal thanks to you for writing this book. It brought me out of a dull period of my sobriety and has made me want to go to meetings again.
It's kind of funny, John. Kevin's group, the Freethinkers group in Kansas City, they're big on your book, and then our group is big on Mario Hornbacher's book.
Oh, well, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, we won't go to that debate. But I like the book too.
Okay, well, thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir.
Take care now.
Okay.
Well, that's it for another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you join us again very soon. Next week, hopefully, as we have another interesting guest for you to listen to. Until then, be well.